be considerate of your own heart, of your own life as you approach God and what you're saying and your mentality and your perspective and all those things. So when we get to Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is explaining in the Sermon on the Mount, in this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about how the hypocrites, they do 3 religious activities with the wrong heart, the wrong way. He says they give, they pray, and they fast. They're doing religious things. They look spiritual. They're doing the right things from the perspective of the world, from the typical Jewish person going, wow, or from the typical Hebrew looking at the Pharisees going, wow, they're so spiritual. They're so amazing. They're doing the right things, but with the wrong heart. And Jesus actually says it's actually the wrong way. They might as well not be doing it. They might as well not be giving or praying or fasting because they're just after human rewards. They're after temporary human accomplishments and praise and applause and, all the things and the approval of man. That's all they want. So by the time we get to Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, Jesus has already talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, don't give like the Pharisees and the hypocrites. They make a public spectacle of themselves. Now he's going to take that same framework he used for giving, and he's going to apply that to praying. Then he's going to apply that to fasting, which prayer and fasting go together. But listen to what he says in verse 5. He says, and when you pray, which by the way, it seems to be an expectation. It just seems to be understood. Like, yeah, you're going to pray. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. Okay, what about the hypocrites should I be protecting myself against and guarding myself against and making sure I don't do? Well, he says, because here's why. The hypocrites, they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Do you know what they love more than God? They love the approval and the applause of people. They love people, cheering for them and thinking much of them and regarding high. In other words, they are so obsessed with the opinion of man, they've begun to completely neglect the opinion and the approval of God in their giving, in their praying, in their fasting. The hypocrites, the reason they make a public spectacle of themselves as you enter into chapter 7 is because at the end of the day, they love money. They serve money. They worship money. And if they can get more people to approve of what they're doing, if they can get more people to like them and cheer and have all the applause of the Hebrew people in Jerusalem, that means more money in their pockets because they serve money, not God. So we know that the hypocrites, per the words of Jesus, they pray to impress people. And Jesus is saying, hey, when you pray, essentially, don't pray to be seen by others. Don't pray to put on this spiritual pretense. Don't pray to garner the attention and the applause of people. Don't pray to impress those who are listening. All these different ways of saying, don't pray in such a way where you're concerned with people's opinions and you're ignoring and neglecting God's. Don't pray in such a way where what you're saying, you're choosing your words based on who's listening, or you use certain lingo and certain language based on who's around and based on who's gonna, approve of what you're doing. Forget what people have to say about your prayer. You ain't praying to them. And this is more addressing the public aspect of prayer. Jesus is not gonna say public prayer in and of itself is an inherently bad thing. It's not what he says. He says there's a kind of public prayer that you need to be on guard against and make sure you don't fall into it. It's the kind of prayer where in public, whether leading Bible study or leading a voice chat prayer or you're with a few people or you're at the mall and God leads you to pray, be very careful not to pray in such a way where you're just trying to impress people and it's not even praying to God anymore. You're praying to people. This is what I'm trying to get you to avoid. Don't let yourself become distracted by the opinion of man. Don't let your mind wander into the realm of, well, I wonder if they're thinking this about what I'm praying and if what I say here would really get them to think I'm spiritual. Don't even consider those things when it comes to you talking to the Father. And yet, I need to drink this because I didn't just grab it to grab it. And yet this is the story of so many of our experiences with prayer in public. Public prayer is fine. And he's going to address verse 6 and 7, what it looks like. Don't get wrapped up in the public dimension of prayer. Meaning if you're going to pray in public, pray as if you're in private. And it's just you and God. Where you picture yourself approaching the Father and all you care about is the one who sits on the throne who can do something about what you're praying about. And you're face to face with him, and even if the world is watching, it doesn't matter. Because you just want his attention. You just want his approval. You just want him to actually come through and answer whatever request you have. So Jesus says, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. They've already gotten what their heart wants. The approval of man. Impressing people to be seen and the applause. They've gotten their reward. They settle for what man can give. And prayer is not a means to gain worldly possessions or worldly riches, or prayer is not a means to self-gain, or a means to self-profit, or a means to garnishing attention for myself. A lot of people treat prayer, especially in the public sphere, when on Sundays or wherever you meet, it's time to pray. In mid-service, we had 2 worship songs, so now it's time to have an elder come up. It's so easy to let the flesh creep in. And now, this sweet time where it's supposed to be you approaching the Father, it's now, I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder if they'll like this. I wonder how I look. I wonder if I'm stuttering. And you get so in your head, you can't even talk to God anymore because you're so busy projecting thoughts on other people, thinking you know what they're thinking about your prayers, and you don't. These people, they settle for what man can give. They settle for worldly gain. And prayer is just a means to worldly gain, self-profit. And you have to ask yourself, do I pray with that kind of heart? Or my prayer, forget the whole public aspect, just prayer in general. Do I view prayer as just a means for worldly gain? As just a means for my needs to be met, as just a means for me to have what I really want and accumulate worldly treasures and possessions and gain more influence and gain more traction in my career and explode my business? Is prayer just a means by which you intend to take steps forward in the worldly sense of making progress? Truly I say to you, they've received their reward. But, now watch. He says, but instead of doing that, here's a different way to pray. Here's the contrasted way to pray. That is contrasted with this example of the hypocrites. When you pray, go into your room. And a lot of people take this to mean Jesus only values and accepts private prayer. That's not what he's saying. When you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who prays in secret will reward you. And you go, how do you know Jesus is not against public prayer? Because he prays in public all the time. And he has a private prayer life as well. The problem is when you pray in such a way where it's only when certain people are around, or it's only when you're in certain environments, or it's only when you're in a church atmosphere and there are religious people around that you want to impress and show them that you know the Bible. When you only pray based on your environment and who's around, you're not praying with the right heart. If you don't have a private prayer life and you only pray in public realms, or if you only have a private prayer life and you never pray around other people, I think there seems to be an imbalance. It's both. I should pray with people and for people, but also behind the scenes when no one's looking. And if I only have a public prayer life, that shows that I'm not as authentic as I'd like to portray myself to be. Go into your room and shut the door. Jesus is all about, here's the issue at hand. Secrecy and the attention of the Father seem to be key elements in what kind of prayer Jesus is promoting. He's saying, pray to your Father. Those people, the hypocrites who make a public spectacle, break out the trumpets and be like, well, time to pray, everyone. They are not concerned with the attention of God. They don't care about his approval. They don't care about his opinion. They don't care about having a secret private prayer life where just the Father sees them, because that doesn't get them more money. That doesn't get them more success and more validation from people. It doesn't get them what they really are after, you know. So when you pray, it goes like this. Don't pray to impress people. Don't pretend to be spiritual. Don't put on a face. Don't try new words out. Don't exercise and flex your biblical knowledge and big old hermeneutical words. Just pray the way you talk to God in private. And that's easier said than done, because a lot of us have just been raised in this culture to obsess about what people think about what you're saying and doing. And we just live in our heads all day, can't even enjoy life, can't even enjoy prayer. Luke 18:10, Jesus gives a parable. And again, this is not just don't pray to impress people, it's don't pray solely for worldly gain, as a means for worldly progress and success. So Jesus gives this parable. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves, okay, that they were righteous. So what does it mean that they trust in themselves? They have self-righteousness, and they treated others with contempt. Self-righteousness will always belittle other people. That's a sign that you are self-righteous in some sense, is that you look down on others, judge others as if to be better and superior and just overall, you know, more valuable than other people, and you look down with contempt. That is never ever a justifiable perspective to have. There's no way to excuse that. That actually is an indication you have some self-righteousness that needs to be dealt with, and I have the same thing, man. So watch this. He says, 2 men went up into the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, okay, trusted in themselves. The other was a tax collector. The least you'd expect Jesus to use as the hero in this parable. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed, "Oh God, thank you I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even like this tax collector." Like, bro, you're saying that right in front of him? He can hear you. He's in earshot. "I fast twice a week." Notice how this Pharisee, he's using prayer as a way to bring God his resume and list his credentials and tell God why he's so awesome. If you'd use prayer like that, fix that real fast. "I fast twice a week." Prayer is not a way for you to put yourself on display to impress God. Prayer is not a way for, this is not American Idol. He's not judging you based on your credentials that you bring him in prayer and going, "All right, show me what you got this week." "Well, here's everything I did, God. Here's my resume." That's a terrible way to use, that's a terrible reason to pray. "I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get." But the tax collector, standing far off, notice, he dare not approach or presume to come near to God, knowing his own sinfulness. There's a humility. There's an admission of sin. There's already a recognition of guilt and conviction. He wouldn't even lift up his eyes to heaven. But he beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the Pharisee. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. Don't use prayer as a means or as a way to flex your own spirituality and bring your credentials to God to try and impress him. Some of us do that. Or as we're talking to God, we kind of run out of things to say, or maybe we're insecure, or maybe we're unsure if we can be here, and we feel like I don't deserve to be here, so I need to reach into my pocket, see what I can pull out from this week's, performance report, and see what I can bring God to hopefully give me a sense of confidence to be here in my prayer time. It's a terrible way to pray. Don't do that. I'm not condemning people who do that. I'm trying to call you to something higher and better. Prayer was never to be that. Prayer was humility is what he actually tells you to have. Not flexing, not your resume. It's not about what you can bring. It's about what he's allowed, what he's done through his son for you to be there. Now we get to verse 7. Not only are the hypocrites a bad role model for prayer, but the Gentiles also, being the unbelieving pagans in the surrounding nations. He says, when you pray, don't heap up empty phrases, as the Gentiles do. What do you mean empty phrases? He'll probably explain that. I think he does pretty well. For they think they'll be heard for their many words. Now this is kind of like what we saw in Luke 18. They supposed themselves to be righteous. They trusted in themselves. In other words, they approach God in prayer on the basis of their own performance. They approach God in prayer on the basis of their own religious activity and spiritual things they've done. It's terrible. And in the same way, with the Gentiles approaching their false god, their idols in prayer on the basis of how much they can repeat something or the words they use. They're many words. They're many words. I believe that in the New King James, it says vain repetition. That they're actually engaging in what's called vain repetition. Their prayers are so overly repetitive. And this is what people ask me. They go, you mentioned the fact that we shouldn't be overly repetitive in prayer, but God tells us to be persistent and to continue praying until we get an answer, right? So how do you balance that? How do you continue in persistence and continue approaching the throne of God till you get an answer without being overly repetitive and heaping up empty phrases and thinking that he's going to hear me because I'm saying it a lot? How do we balance that? And I think the answer is this. Verse 8 actually gives us an indication of where these pagans are at spiritually, faith-wise. He says, don't be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. What is uniquely different from the believing Jew versus the unbelieving pagan Gentile that worships a false god? What's the difference between the two? Well, one of the key differences is that the believing Jewish individual has a God that they know exists, that for sure has their back, and they can be confident is actually listening because they have a relationship with him. Number one, he exists. Number two, he's very relational, and he invests into the lives of his people, and he's aware, and he's all these things. In other words, they have confidence that they have a Father who has their back. The Gentile, the unbelieving pagans that worship false gods, they don't have that assurance. They don't have that security. They don't have that confidence when they approach their God in prayer. So what do? Because they're insecure, because they're fearful, because their God doesn't even exist, so they have to overcompensate for that, they try and get a sense of security and assurance from saying things over and over and over. It's the idea of the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel, right? With the whole showdown between God and Baal on Mount Carmel. And you have Elijah on the side of God, and then you have the pagan priests on the side of Baal. And they're trying to call down fire and get their God's attention. And they start chanting mindlessly, recklessly, cutting themselves open, freaking out, trying to get their God's attention by being louder. So they think their volume is what will get their God's attention. Then they engage in these chants, these ritual chants that they think this will get our God's attention. None of it works. Number one, that God doesn't exist. Number two, even if it were to the real God, even if God was the object of their prayer, they're trusting in the repetition of whatever chants, religious ritual chants they're engaging in. Some of us treat prayer like it's a ritual. We've been taught certain prayers, right? Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord. Some of you could finish that. Or we just have been trained by our Baptist father, preacher, that every time we approach a meal, God, thank you for this food. And we've just been trained. It's been taught to us. Nothing bad about that. But we mindlessly regurgitate prayers that we've learned from other people to where it's not even, we don't even mean those things. We're just mindlessly, I hate to use the Hail Mary kind of prayers to be an example of this, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. It is a set of words that you are trusting in to accomplish something rather than trusting in God to answer your request. You put all your trust and confidence in how well you can articulate your prayers, or in how expressive you are and how loud you are, or you trust in how much you repeat yourself. And you think, the more I repeat myself, the more likely this is going to get God's attention to answer. The more I sit here in prayer and just mindlessly repeat this prayer, it's going to get his attention. It's not. That is a very Gentile, pagan, ritualistic way of approaching the living God that is wrong. Keenan, thank you, brother, for that. Good to see you. You didn't have to do that. Thank you guys for your gifts today. But this is how so many people approach prayer. And I'm trying to break off a lot of what New Age has leaked into Christianity. I'm trying to break that off you and help you recognize how you've allowed New Age spirituality to influence the way you approach God, and you're not even aware of it. It's in the shows you watch. It's in the music you listen to. It's in the people you listen to and watch and hang out with. It's in the TikToks you're scrolling through. It's in the video games you play. We are trained by the culture to approach God and think about him wrongly. And the Gentiles, what they do is they heap up empty phrases, vain repetition. They treat prayer like it's an incantation, like they're witches casting spells. And if they say it just right with the right inflection and they rhyme it at the right time, it'll accomplish the right results. And some of us approach prayer very superstitiously. We approach prayer very religiously and in this negative sense, where we pray with this overly repetitious kind of word mashup, right? And we don't even know what we're saying. We don't even mean what we're saying. And we're thinking, as long as I just keep saying this, it's going to yield the results I want. That's not how prayer works. Unlike the pagan Gentiles who pray to false gods, we don't need to mindlessly repeat ourselves to get God's attention.